talk to Ella and everybody who contributed to the debate. I want to thank all the deputies who spoke today and contributed in the debate, and I will respond to as many of the points that have been raised as I can and that have available to me. I will say that some of the points made were very interesting and thought-provoking, but they may have strayed outside the parameters of the finance bill, so I may not be in a position to respond to those, but I certainly note them for future reference. I'm going to take a number of contributions together and go through them. So starting with the income tax package, and Deputies Doherty, Nash, Conway-Walsh, Shortall and O'Murchu, I think, engaged on that particular point. And amongst the points that were made, they focus on the personal income tax package, as I've said. And a key objective for government has been to continually support low and middle income earners, and particularly as incomes have risen, to continue that support. And that policy objective has informed the tax package implemented by the government in recent years. The budget tax package is built around three key pillars: changes to tax credits, the standard rate band and USC. And these levers have been used to spread the benefit of the available package as effectively as possible. As Ireland's income tax system is one of the most progressive in all advanced economies, any reductions in income tax may be somewhat regressive. This is because those outside the tax net cannot benefit from tax reductions. However, they will benefit from the wider suite of supports and cost of living measures announced by the government. For example, married one-earner couples with children on lower incomes will benefit from the significant enhancements to the working family payment. Therefore, when considering the impact of the budget, it is necessary to consider the budget package in the round, looking at tax and welfare changes together, as well as other budget measures that aim to improve the living standards of our citizens, rather than zooming into the specific impact of one particular provision in isolation, which I think is an incorrect way to look at it. In relation to the USC, an exemption for those earning up to $45,000, which is proposed by Deputies Doherty and O'Murchu, or indeed Deputy Boyd Barrett proposed the complete abolition of USC, the only socialist in the House that wants to cut taxes. That would have a significant impact on the makeup of Ireland's tax base, and alternative revenue streams would then have to be found. Deputy Nash's support for the USC is welcome, given it is a stable and sustainable source of revenue for the state. Ireland's progressive personal income tax system plays a crucial role in the process of income redistribution. Our redistributive tax system has been acknowledged by the IMF, the OECD and the ESRI. The government is of the view that a broad-based, progressive income tax system, where the majority of income earners make some contribution, but from each according to their means, is the most fair and sustainable income tax system in the long term. Moving on to the points around the rent tax credits. Deputy Doherty and Deputy O'Murchu both called for rent controls in general. However, research shows that rent controls, while maybe of some effectiveness in the short run in limiting rental inflation, ultimately cost renters in the long run by less market efficiency and reduced availability of units to rent, in other words, a throttling of supply. It's also worth bearing in mind that there are a form of rent controls already in place in the market in the system of rent pressure zones, which control the majority of urban areas in this country at this stage, where rent is capped at 2% per annum in any rent pressure zone, which I say is most of the country by this stage, 2% per annum per year. And any further rent controls lower the rental price below the would-be market rate and reduce any return on investment, which disincentivises adding of new stock or additional supply. And additional regulations in response to rapid rise in rents does not address the underlying cause of the problem, namely against supply, which is something the government are absolutely focused on under its housing for all strategy. And indeed, it's one reason we brought forward the rent tax credit, a measure that had been long proposed by Deputy Doherty himself. Looking at the residential premises rental income relief, the increase in the residential premises rental income relief up to €800 was provided for in the Finance Act No. 2/2023, not in the current bill. The amendments to the relief in this year's bill are mainly technical in nature to ensure that the relief operates as intended. For every tenant, there must be a landlord. There wouldn't be a tenant without a landlord. The rental sector in Ireland is not dominated by large institutional investors. In fact, the majority of landlords in Ireland are private individuals owning perhaps one or sometimes two rental properties, sometimes called mom and pop landlords, often with the view to providing an alternative to a pension income in retirement. Looking at the Help to Buy measures, as the Minister Chambers said on Budget Day, ensuring people have access to home ownership is a key priority for this government, and that is why the Help to Buy scheme is being extended in its current form for a further 4 years up to 31st of December 2029. I would note to Deputy Nash, who queried this in his contribution, that this approach gives certainty to future home buyers and to the market, while housing input So housing output is ramping up. Help to Buy is specifically designed to encourage and support the construction of additional supply of homes. Ultimately, increasing supply is the best way to get to a well-functioning housing market. In relation to Deputy Doherty's comments on the Help to Buy scheme and affordable housing, Help to Buy has always been available for affordable houses that qualify for the scheme. The amendment in this year's finance bill is a technical one requested by the Department of Housing to ensure that in some rare occurrences where an approved affordable purchaser is delayed from making the purchase, a local authority can purchase the new build property from a developer on a temporary basis and then resell on to the affordable purchaser without their eligibility for Help to Buy being affected. A scenario that I would like to think that all of us in the House would encourage and be pleased to see is being addressed. Looking at mortgage interest tax relief, in response to Deputy Nash, who raised this issue, in light of the impact high interest rates continue to have on households, mortgage interest tax relief is being extended for one further year. And I might add that interest rates remain at an historic high compared to the previous 2 decades, whilst beginning to marginally fall, are still well above what they might have been, and perhaps when people made expectations and calculations about their mortgage affordability in recent years. In relation to Deputy Doherty's comments on the measure, it is the Government's continued view that taxpayers with mortgage balances of less than €80,000 on the 31st December 2022 are in general more likely to be in a stronger position compared to those with larger mortgage balances. In addition, such individuals are likely to have significant amounts of equity built up and have relatively low loan-to-value ratios. This means such individuals should have better opportunities to switch their mortgages and obtain more favourable interest rates on their own steam, which will ultimately reduce the interest liability without the need for additional government interventions. As the deputies will appreciate, it is neither possible nor desirable for the government to always alleviate the full impact of higher interest rates for all mortgage holders. It must be on a needs basis. Turning to the vacant homes tax and regarding comments made by Deputy Nash and Deputy Boyd Barrett on vacancy and dereliction, the vacant homes tax is just one of a suite of measures introduced by the government to incentivise the increased use of existing housing stock. It is appropriate that all possible levers are utilised to address vacancy, including the proposed increase to the rate of that tax. The vacant property refurbishment grant under the Croí Cónaithe Towns Fund is another important and successful measure that supports the return of vacant and derelict properties into use. And with Croí Cónaithe Towns, in addition to Croí Cónaithe Basic, that now spans the remit of rural and urban dwellings, and I think it's an excellent scheme that is beginning to see take up, and that brings derelict properties and disused properties back into use. At the end of Q2 2024, over 8,600 applications for that scheme had been received, of which 5,400 were approved and 480 grants had been paid out. The residential zone land tax was queried by Deputies Doherty and Canny. That is an important mechanism to activate land for residential use, and the provision within this bill will allow those undertaking economic activity on their land to make an application to have the land zoned to reflect the use of the land. So if a landowner, namely a farmer, believes it's incorrectly zoned, they can apply to change it. It will come into effect in 2025 and is charged about 3% in the value of the land. And the intention of it is to activate lands for residential development. Looking at stamp duty changes, the government's approach to the issue of investment funds acquiring new house builds in bulk, which involves the higher rate of stamp duty bulk acquisitions, is being increased now from 10% to 15%. And in addition to that, planning measures have already ensured that a very low percentage of transactions have fallen within the remit of the levy, and any further intervention to reduce bulk acquisitions could have a limited impact due to the level of those acquisitions already being very low. Indeed, the planning measures brought in by my colleague Minister Darragh O'Brien in May 2021 have resulted in close to 50,000 houses being prohibited from bulk purchase through conditions imposed by local authorities or by An Bord Pleanála at the point of application. And I welcome the fact that those 50,000 homes are now available to first-time buyers and others as opposed to any bulk funds. Deputy McGrath made an extremely curious comment that he said 4 out of 10 properties were being bought by vulture funds. I can see no evidence whatsoever to suggest anything of the sort. A couple of hundred properties out of maybe 30,000 new builds, not forgetting second-hand and other transactions, homes that are sold, is the actual figure, less than 1%, and I struggle to see where the Deputy arrived at that figure. He did make reference to large farm sales in Tipperary, and I think in all due respect to the Deputy and to large farm buyers and sellers, they're not the preserver first-time buyers, and they're unlikely to be competing in that market. I think it's apples and oranges. In actual fact, it's orchards and oranges. So I just put that strongly back to Deputy McGrath. Looking at PRSAs, I would note that Revenue has actively monitored developments since the introduction of these changes in Finance Act 2022, and the examine of employer contributions to PRSAs in 2023 identified a small number of cases that gave rise to concerns. I assure the Deputy that there is no evidence that such practices are widespread. Nonetheless, it is only right that I bring forward amendments to curtail such undesirable activity And the Finance Bill 24 will introduce a new limit of 100% salary for employer contributions to PRSAs. Looking at the standard funds threshold, I would note, and Deputy Doherty raised this, the changes being introduced in relation to standard funds threshold follow from the conclusion of a report by independent expert Dr Donald Butler. That had remained unchanged since 2014, and the changes contained in the Finance Bill were agreed by Government and well flagged in advance, and are important retention measures that give certainty and clarity to those pursuing promotion in the workplace. The Deputy's characterisation of the changes as a tax break requires clarification. Tax relief for contributions to pensions is more properly considered as tax deferred rather than tax foregone. Pensions are subject to income tax at the point of drawdown, apart from the tax-free lump sum. Lass, I'm not sure if there's any latitude. Or
I'm giving you some.
Okay, very well. I'll jump to the. I'll wrap up very shortly. Just want to mention the film industry, which is mentioned by a number of deputies. There's the scale credit being introduced, but I do take note of the concerns expressed regarding employment practices, and there has been extensive engagement over recent years with the officials of the Department of Finance and indeed with the film sector, and the Department has engaged with representative bodies. Collective agreements have been arrived at in some cases, and indeed the issue of copyright has also been examined, and progress is being made with Screen Ireland to make progress and further progress on that issue. Looking at the bank levy, just to point out that the bank levy is not intended to punish the liable banks, but rather to recoup some of the state investment that was made at the time of its inception. And it does apply only to those who receive financial assistance from the state during the financial crisis, and those which are still operating. The target for the year ahead is 200 million to be recouped from those measures. There are a couple of other points that were made by different deputies. Deputy Michael Healy-Ray queried VAT refunds at farm equipment. And just to clarify for the deputy's benefit for any other interested parties, that the Revenue recently issued new guidelines on such purchases to make clear what was in or out of scope. And there's actually been no change. Revenue's approaching this. I think it's important to make that point. Finally, on the issue of the VAT on hospitality and the VAT 9 campaign that we're all aware of, and I would know many people in my own constituency also, as indeed every member in the House would, who would be campaigning for this, and with some cause. However, the reality is that the cost of such a measure for a full year is close to €1 billion, 868 million. And I challenge the deputies calling for such a measure, indeed proposing votes on it tonight, to say what €1 billion spending would you cut instead? What other measures would be sacrificed in order for that to happen? There may be other ways to support the industry. Indeed, there are. The Power Up grant supporting businesses under energy costs, further VAT, and indeed a higher VAT entry point now for entering the VAT code. So there's a number of issues going on. And just finally, this is my last concurrence, Deputy Berry and Deputy Shortall asked about the charity GP practices. I think it's an important point. Just want to state that the Minister for Finance is engaged in that issue. There are limitations under the legislation and contract law, but the Department are engaged with GP Care for All group in an attempt to find a solution. So the Minister is aware of it. There is engagement going on. It is a worthy cause, and efforts are being made to address that issue. Thank you. That's Ken Corda.